The FCC's one-to-one requirement could be retroactive, meaning that come January 27th, any leads acquired prior to that date, if you do not have one-to-one consent, you do not have permission to call or text them.
Welcome. Hello, I'm Benjamin Farah. I'm the Director of Privacy Security Compliance at Active Prospect. This is one of the many content pieces that we've been putting together and will continue in the weeks and months ahead as we help the lead generation and performance marketing industry navigate the most recent FCC one-to-one consent rules and related updates to the TCPA, which is the Telephone Consumer Protection Act. We believe the content we're putting together will help you decode these changes with more confidence and a focus on compliance. Today's topic, scenarios and solutions, preparing your CRM for one-to-one consent. I'd say failing to prepare is preparing to fail. So for the past 20 plus years, I've worked for companies in the performance marketing and market research space, including Dentsu and WPP Kantar, with much focus on privacy and data regulation compliance. Also worked at Ernst & Young in New York as an IT controls auditor in financial services and in the internal firm privacy compliance program. Prior to that, I worked as an auditor at Ochsner Clinic Hospital in New Orleans, Louisiana, so that was in the realm of healthcare and insurance. All of my roles were in functions or departments focused on legal, compliance, privacy, IT audit, and data security. And one clear development has followed through my career. In every one of these industries and jobs, a significant data regulation or law was passed, and I was on the team responsible for reviewing and translating these new rules, and as we work to seek clarity and establish a compliance program around them. So things such as SOX, HIPAA, GDPR, U.S. state and country data privacy laws, and industry-specific data regulations. And now, for a brief background and introduction, I would like to pass the mic to my co-host today, Michael Paranto, Director of Professional Services at Active Prospect. Michael.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben. Really glad to be here today. So again, my name is Michael Paranto. I'm the Director of Professional Services here at Active Prospect. A little bit of background about myself. I've been in the CRM, contact center, and lead management space for over 13 years. I've previously worked for CRM companies in the past, including Velocify and Shape Software. I've done large implementations of contact center softwares, including Five9 and NICE and Contact, for companies that either I've worked for or have done consulting work for in the past. One of my previous jobs, I worked for Cardinal Financial Company Limited Partnership, where I was the director of lead marketing. I was in charge of a multi-million-dollar monthly lead budget. So that included the acquisition of leads, negotiations of contracts, reviewing of legal disclosures, as well as administrative work for our CRM platforms, including the Velocify CRM and NICE and Contact. The reason why I provided some of that context for you is because this webinar is really going to help you plan for some of these upcoming FCC one-to-one changes. I'm going to focus on CRM, contact center softwares, lead providers, and first-party landing pages. And what I want to do is help you plan for these upcoming changes with those situations in mind. So with that, Ben, you want to go ahead and move on to the next slide?
Sure. Thanks, Michael. I want to recap and pause because there have been 4 significant announcements that have happened over the last 4+ months. And it was a lot to keep up with. And I do notice the industry is sort of jumbling them together, which is understandable because a lot happened in a short amount of time. But I wanted to separate them out because when we talk about developing a compliance program and then the dates that are involved with that, you do have to break these down a bit individually. So recapping, the first significant item that happened was the FCC's TCPA update. This was announced in November and then issued in December and then approved in January of this year. And it was entitled Targeting and Eliminating Unlawful Text Messages, Rules and Regulations Implementing the TCPA and Advanced Methods to Target and Eliminate Unlawful Robocalls. The major impacts of this, well, clearly the FCC's headline was FCC closes lead generator robocall loophole and adopts robotext rules. So how and with what are they doing this with? It is the one-to-one consent requirement, which is what you've heard referred to in updates since then. So why? Well, the FCC inquiries and investigations and collaboration with the FTC and the state attorney generals They identified in their comments in the NPRM and all their subsequent investigation comments, they indicated they do not look favorably upon what they're seeing in their investigations and inquiries when they identified occurrences of lead transactions, or these are interested parties in a good or service, that were or had the potential to be shared with tens to hundreds of other potential interested purchasers of lead data. All right, they indicated this can directly contribute to volumes of calls and text messages and making it challenging for consumers to stop the outreach. Some of the other terms they said was no more lead forms or no consent forms, and not a form like a website. I'm talking about like a dairy, like a mass production of a single event turning into multiple things. So the new rules model was a consent to contact transaction. It needs to be more transparent with the consumer, more clearly indicating a one-to-one indication of who the data will be shared with for contact outreach. So with this, there's also new record-keeping requirements. And to be clear, this is lead sellers and lead buyers both in possession of evidence of the lead consent to contact transaction. This is different than current date, where you can just rely on someone having that consent transaction and share with you if needed. Both of the lead buyers and sellers are going to need it. So for example, for active prospect customers, if you're analyzing your lead transactions for compliance, both need to be claiming the trusted form certificate in your CRM before you're calling or texting the lead. Some other significant items in that update was illogical and topical content. So this relates to site interaction and site purpose. Again, the theme of no lead forms, no consent forms. Have the content related to where the contact outreach is going to be. Avoid surprises for a consumer if they receive a phone call or text about that. Also updated there was text messages are now affirmatively included in the National DNC program. This was already ruled as existent, but they made it very clear that text messages are part of Do Not Call national program. And there's also pieces of the FCC can demand phone numbers to be blocked, but it's related to call carriers and networks, so we're not going to discuss that here. I'm going to talk about compliance dates in a few minutes, but the next significant item was the FCC's TCPA update, or empowering consumers to block robocalls and robotexts. This was approved in February. Major impacts relate to revoking consent for regulated technology, calls or texts by consumers using, quote, any reasonable means. So this is by call, by text, by email, by postal mail. Any reasonable means is any where an individual can revoke consent and say, I do not want to be contacted. So this is going to require companies to honor company-specific do not call and revocation of consent requests as soon as practicable. And that means in the rules, no more than 10 business days after receipt of the request. Okay. This could be for marketing messages, and this can be for informational messages. So there's a lot more to unpack there. We'll talk about dates in a few minutes. The third item is TCPA update. It is a declaratory ruling, and it was implications of artificial intelligence technologies on protecting consumers from unwanted robocalls and robotexts. FCC headline says, they confirm TCPA applies to AI technologies that generate human voices. This came out in February. So what does this do? It requires prior express written consent. So this relates to your notice and opt-in language that says that this AI technology will be used. So artificial or pre-recorded voices can resemble human voices. There's a lot more to unpack there, and we'll talk about dates in a few minutes. But again, checking with your prior express written consent language. And the fourth item was from the FTC. This happened in March. So FTC announces updates to the TSR, or telemarketing sales rules. What did they do here? They expanded the record-keeping requirements for calling records. Some additional fields are required, and they included a record of consent to contact to be within the transaction. So save that as well. And the retention was extended from 2 to 5 years. They also mentioned the FTC can now more easily investigate and take action on deceptive B2B calls or business-to-business calls. And of course, they did not extend the do not call protections to B2B calls, but more focused on deceptive calls in that area. So 4 significant updates. What did they do? When we talk about dates, the theme of today, that creates about 5 dates that you need to start tracking for operational compliance. So we put them on a timeline here for you to follow along with. So first box, with the FCC's announcement that AI voice calling technology needs prior express written consent, this was a declaratory ruling. So that is in effect on the date of the announcement. So this was already passed February 8th. So perhaps your consent language already accounted for this. If not, you should start to check and consider that. The next block here is the FCC consent revoking requirements for the TCPA. That creates 2 key dates to note. One is, of course, this reminder is about revoking consent for regulated technologies, calls or text, any reasonable means. The first date is the TBD, subject to change, which we've loaded here as October 24th. So that's the 3rd block. So why is it a TBD? It's because this rule was announced. The revoking part was later definitely delayed, but that doesn't mean it's not going to come back. It will return, and it's not considered a major rule by the FCC. So they can implement it with a 30 to 60-day time frame until implementation. So it's important that we start tracking it. My legal peers who follow this FCC very closely say maybe October 24, but it's good to mark that so you can start tracking towards it. And the second block that's already passed is the details and allowance for a one-time confirmation back to the individual when you do the consent revoking. That's connected there, and you'll have to unpack that a little bit, but allows you to communicate to the individual to confirm before just someone says, stop messaging me. So there's some allowances for that. The 4th block and key date is the TSR, telemarketing sales rules updates. This is the expanded rule keeping requirements, record of consent, retention period from 2 to 5 years. That's October 15th of 2024. And then the final key date, which started us on this whole journey, is the update for the one-to-one consent and further consent record keeping requirements, and also the logical and topical areas for your website designs as well. So that's a timeline of things to start keeping track of. And now we're going to start to share some thought leadership and actions around what you should do to start this journey. But there's one last wrinkle I have to make you aware of. Since one of today's topic is about marking dates, we have to mention that the possibility of retroactive consent related to one-to-one. So what does this mean? What are we talking about? You're probably going to start hearing this term in the weeks and months ahead. So January 27th, 2025 is the enforcement date, but what about the 30, 60, 90 days prior to that in your lead funnels, right? And what about the unpredictability of legal challenges and cases that could happen in the coming months to attempt to widen the applicability date? These could fail, but the key part is to prepare, but more specifically, operationally, really understand it's not just that date. What about the leads you're collecting in the days prior to that? And how can you best account for them in your systems? So hopefully that was a helpful recap of all the significant items that happened over the last 4 months and breaking them out, but it's a lot to follow. But I thought that helped set the scene about what are we going to do now to help operationalize these things and then break it down.
Yeah. So Ben, I want to real quick focus on this last topic that you were discussing in regards to retroactive consent, because I know some of those that are out there that are marketers may or may not have actually thought about this. So let's look at this from a realistic scenario. There is a very real possibility that the FCC's one-to-one requirement could be retroactive, meaning that come January 27th, any leads acquired prior to that date, if you do not have one-to-one consent, you do not have permission to call or text them in that scenario. We anticipate this to be litigated within the courts. As you know, within the world of TCPA, Ben, we've seen many, many different opinions on some of the definitions of that legislation and some of the changes that have been made. So we need to assume a scenario where this could potentially be retroactive. So what we're going to do in this webinar is talk about what a one-to-one consent action plan is and how to prepare your different systems and vendors for this potential of a change, including your CRMs and contact centers as well. So let's go ahead and move on to the next part. All right. So let's think about what a one-to-one consent action plan really is. So here are the steps that I would take if I was working at some of my previous companies in order to plan for this. So the first one is, at the moment that I heard of this change, I would immediately take this to my legal team. I would ask for their interpretation of this rule. they're going to formulate different opinions on it, and they're going to provide that to you. One of the things that I think you should really focus on with this is making sure that you understand what is your disclosure requirements, and also as well as how far back you believe that you can contact your customers. So you need to understand, like today, let's say your legal team's opinion is that you can call leads 30 days after you receive consent. Well, that means that you need to start gathering that consent, that one-to-one consent, 30 days before that rule change occurs. Once you've gotten your legal team's interpretation, which can take a period of time, some legal teams are well prepared for this, and they know about the TCPA, they know about these changes. Some other legal teams, they may not necessarily know about the TCPA. They may need to seek outside counsel. That's going to take quite a bit of time for this to go through your internal processes and legal teams. All right. Once you've got that interpretation from your legal team, then you're going to want to meet with your internal teams. This is going to include your marketing teams, your IT teams, any team that's involved with system administration, as well as your BI and reporting teams. You're really going to want to, on this meeting, discuss what systems and vendors are going to be affected by this change. I recommend you put this on a spreadsheet so that way you have it listed out. You list out what components that this could be affected from based off of your legal team's requirements. And then you're going to start outreaching to each of these vendors or internal teams and planning for this change. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the fourth one. And so now you're going to meet with your systems and vendors. So you're going to schedule meetings with your vendors. You're going to want to meet with them, discuss these different requirements that they may have. And one thing that we are going to prepare for you is we're going to put a little link in the chat for you for some outreach items for your internal teams as well as your lead providers.
Yeah, we've put together some samples of language to queue up, to use as an email to start to outreach with some information to help move things along, to make people aware of what is it that you're specifically asking about. So we're happy to share that.
Yep. All right. So once you've gone through and you determined what vendors and what internal systems and internal departments are affected by this change, you've planned meetings for them, we're going to talk about what some of these components that are going to be affected. And the first topic we're going to talk about is what discussion topics should you have with your lead providers or publishers. So the first thing that if I was going to approach a lead provider or publisher is I would want to understand what changes they're making for the upcoming one-to-one consent. So some lead providers and publishers, they're going to be making entirely different changes to their landing pages, how their leads are going through their funnels, et cetera. And you're going to want to know what that looks like, because you need to be able to understand if that meets your legal requirement for the FCC's one-to-one change. In addition to that, you're also going to want to understand when they plan on making that change. So in a scenario where one-to-one consent is retroactive, you want to make sure that you are communicating to them like, hey, our legal team has determined that we can contact leads up to 30 days after consent. I need you to be ready 30 days prior to that January 27th change for the FCC one-to-one ruling. Another thing that you're going to want to discuss with your lead providers is, are they appropriately capturing consent? So, with Active Prospect, with our Trusted Form product, you want to make sure that they are capturing consent, they are providing you with that consent, and you are claiming that certificate. One of the requirements is that both the seller and the lead buyer have to have proof of consent for this FCC's one-to-one change. A third topic that you're going to want to discuss is your lead pricing. So some of these lead providers, they do a shared lead model where basically a consumer fills out a form. It's sold to many different lead buyers at the same time. In this new environment, it requires FCC's one-to-one consent. So your pricing could very well change with these lead providers. So you're going to want to have this discussion with them now and kind of get an understanding of what they are looking to do in regards to pricing, because this can affect your budgets and your overall lead spend. Some other topics for your lead providers is disclosures. So, Ben, I know that you mentioned this quite a bit in regards to your timelines, but we need to be focusing on, what are our disclosures going to be saying? So you mentioned that one for the AI voice. That needs to be in your disclosures, and you need to be actively monitoring your disclosures. So in a world where, if you look at this before, there's some of you out there who do actively monitor your disclosures. There's some who kind of do it, intermittently every other quarter, whatever it may be, and some don't do it at all. I highly recommend that you regularly monitor your disclosures, either on a monthly or quarterly basis. You should be using tools that actually automate this process. One, it just makes it easier for you to manage. In a manual scenario, you have to approach every single lead provider, ask them what their disclosures are. They're going to provide it to you. Then you have to take that back to your legal team. That's an extremely lengthy process for you to do, and it's going to take a lot of your time. In addition to that, there may be some disclosure changes that aren't necessarily disclosed to you in real time in that scenario. So using a tool that can help you monitor your disclosures is something that I highly, highly recommend that you do. Now, Active Prospect, we have a product called Verify. What our Active Prospect Verify tool does is allows you to, when you receive a lead, you get that trusted form certificate, you claim it, it will take the disclosure language and automatically populate it for you to either approve or reject. This is something that is more real time in nature. So as soon as you get a lead with new disclosures, if they don't match your criteria for accepted or rejected, you have the ability to go in and actively review those disclosures. Now, if you approve them or reject them, depending on where it can be, if you combine this with our lead conduit tool, you can actually do live rejections of disclosures in real time. So some other things to take into account as well is that when you're looking at your disclosures, this is just a little key action item for you. In a scenario where there's one-to-one consent, you want to make sure that your disclosures have your company name listed on it. So in the past, we saw this a lot with the consent forms that are out there, et cetera. Customers going through, they're filling out the form. At the bottom, there's the disclosure, which has a link to a list of companies. That list could be thousands of companies long. That's not something that's going to exist in a one-to-one consent environment. So you're going to want to continuously monitor these disclosures to make sure that you are effectively compliant with these changes. So with that, Ben, I think we've got a quick poll question here.
Yeah, we do. So it's a good time to ask this. So our poll here is, and a special note to note the poll section that's on the right in the webinar platform. So poll is, do you currently have a technology to monitor and manage your consent language across different lead providers? We've got 4 options. A, yes, I use a spreadsheet to manually review them. As Michael said, spreadsheets are his favorite tool. Yeah. B, I have a program that I can use to monitor my disclosures already. C, I'd love to learn more about Active Prospect's Verify product. Or D, I use my eyeballs, I spot check, but I'm not really monitoring my disclosures. So submit those responses, and then we'll circle back later in the presentation to go see where everyone's standing on this.
All right. So let's move on to the next topic here. We're going to talk about how to prepare your CRM or contact center software for these upcoming changes. Now, when I mention CRMs, there's many different CRM tools that are out there. There's, Velocify's, there's HubSpots, there's Marketo's. Contact center softwares can include things like a Five9, a Nice in Contact, Genesys, RingCentral, Avaya, etc. And I'm really going to discuss. Really going to discuss topics that relate to these particular categories of softwares. So the first thing that I would do with these FCC one-to-one consent changes is I would create a flag field in my CRM that indicates that I have one-to-one consent. So you're going to have a field that basically can be as simple as a checkbox field that indicates that you have one-to-one consent for this lead. The reason why you're going to want this is in a situation that one-to-one consent is retroactive, you need to be able to appropriately filter out leads that you do not have one-to-one consent for automated dialing, text messaging, drip campaigns, etc. Another thing that you're going to want to do as well is you're going to want to have reporting for the FCC's one-to-one consent change. So as they go through and this change goes into effect, you're going to find situations where certain lead sources that may or may not have performed well in the past are going to change in their relative conversion, because you're going to have lead vendors that are out there that are making these changes that don't match what their current business structure is. So you may see a situation where a lead provider that was doing really, really well in the past, you may see performance go down. You may see performance go up. You're going to want to be able to effectively filter these leads within those platforms and monitor your performance. Something else that's important here with a flag field is that it allows you to, you're going to want to bring this field into your BI tools that you have available to you. So some of you just do reporting directly out of your CRM system or your contact center system, et cetera. You're going to want to make sure that that flag is in those systems as well as in outside third-party BI reporting tools like a Tableau or internal data warehouses.
Yeah, and Mike, also want to mention this flag exercise for the CRMs. I would encourage everyone, talk with your legal teams, talk with your sales and marketing teams, talk with your technology teams, because the fact that you're going in and have to do some additional adding of fields, it's going to allow you more granular reporting. There could be other initiatives in the company that the legal team also wanted to flag these things to help reduce risk or just produce more business value about understanding all sorts of things that you can segment from that. So don't just view it as purely compliance exercise. It does that. It can reduce risks. But if you look at it from another perspective, this could really generate some business value when you really think about the flags you could add to the fields.
That's exactly right, Ben. And for those of you who are in some of the larger organizations, when you're bringing data into different systems, this is something that can take quite a while to do. So it's not something that's like, hey, I can do this in a day. There's quarterly planning that has to take place, and you got to get the right teams in for this. So you're going to want to start planning for this change now. And to Ben's point, you might as well throw in some things that you wanted as well. You know, if there's a couple other fields from your CRM that's not currently in your BI tools or reporting softwares, bring those in. They're going to be bringing in these fields anyways. It's going to save you a lot of time in the future. Now, another thing that you're going to want as well is you're going to want to make sure that you are capturing the consent within your CRM or contact center platform. So we mentioned this throughout the webinar, but we want to make sure your lead provider is currently getting the consent, but you need to have that consent at your disposal as a part of these requirements. So you're going to want to take in that certificate, claim that certificate, and have that stored in a field for a situation where either a regulator comes around or a TCPA plaintiff comes around in order to try to get that data for you.
Yeah, an important point. Remember to claim that. Some of our clients are on point with that. We even have an auto claiming feature, but it's always very disappointing when we had just the false assumption that just because a trusted form certificate was there, that meant that it was retained. No, it only exists for a period of time until it's claimed for longer term retention and then that legal defense reason. So
that's right. And some other things too to think about when it comes to like the retention of records. You know, Ben, I think you made a really good point there. It goes from 2 to 5 years for the retention of records. So some of your systems may be set up to auto purge data, and you're going to want to make sure that you actually move that timeline out from 2 years to 5 years within your own internal systems. Now, the next point that I wanted to bring up is also, Ben, you touched about this as well. There are certain reporting requirements for the TSR. Now, I know this webinar is about the FCC's one-to-one consent, but the TSR has very, very specific reporting requirements that you may or may not have readily available to you. Some of these things include extensive call detail records, including the calling number, the called number, the time, date, and duration of the call, the disposition of the call. You have to have a complete copy of the consent that's available to you, et cetera. So as you're going through and refining some of your reporting requirements, you want to look at the TSR as well and make sure that's brought into your internal tools for your own reporting purposes.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that also helps with the safe harbor component of that, meaning if you get an inquiry or asking for information, providing those. If you're not able to provide those basic mechanics, you might have stubbed your toe on the way into just an honest mistake or something being missed out. So it's important to have an understanding of what those are and then record them and expand your record keeping. That's
right. Now, the next topic we're going to talk about is your first-party leads and landing pages. So you are going to have, obviously your company, you've got your own first-party leads that you're originating. You want to make sure that those landing pages have the appropriate disclosures on them that comply for these upcoming FCC one-to-one consent changes. In addition to that you are capturing that consent using an automated method like Active Prospects Trusted Form. And then you also want to review these disclosures on a regular basis. So you can use some of our automated disclosure tools like Active Prospects Verify to bring in your disclosures and regularly monitor them. We did have a quick question in the chat, Ben. I want to make sure that we talk about this. Does the one-to-one consent requirement apply to companies of all sizes?
Yes, it would. Yes, I wouldn't see why not. No, the no disclosures, no
That's
caveat
right.
for that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's important to understand that, we've seen this a lot with the TCPA. So the TCPA has wreaked havoc in regards to CRM and contact center softwares in the past. I've personally seen companies that have been class actions that are 50 employees long that get $1 million fines. I've seen some that are really large that get $10 million fines. You need to plan for these requirements regardless of your company size. Don't think that those bad actors that are out there, those known litigants, et cetera, are not going to get to you. They are active, they are out there, and they are going to these different sites, filling out forms for the purpose of getting TCPA complaints so they can seek a class action lawsuit.
Yeah. Now, one caveat with that. I mean, it does regard the use of regulated ATDS technology.
That's right.
To put that on the side, it's not all calls at any time. It's not as much a company size. It's the use of ATDS that can also go down a deep well of the use or applicability of that. Get your legal counsel to give you an opinion about the solution you're using for that, but it does revolve around that component of whether there's use of ATDS in the calling technology.
All right. So let's move to the key takeaways here. So number one, now is really the time that you should be preparing your company's technology for the one-to-one consent changes. We talked about this all throughout this webinar. There's a very, very real possibility the FCC's one-to-one consent could be retroactive. And if that's the case, you need to start planning now. In addition to that, you should have an outreach plan set up to reach out to your vendors, including your systems, your lead providers, internal marketing teams, et cetera, to make sure that you are complying with these upcoming changes. The third thing is that you want to pencil in your calendar some of these key compliance dates that were shared today in the webinar. Some are subject to change. Obviously, there are some of them that Ben talked about where they've stepped out of the action plan, et cetera, but you want to make sure that you're taking note of those dates and how they actively apply for your organization. The fourth thing is you want to make sure when you're going through this process that you always seek your own internal legal counsel. So we obviously have our own opinions in regards to the FCC's one-to-one consent, but you want to make sure that you are reviewing this internally with your own legal counsel to get their opinions on what type of flags, fields, and what components of your organization that this could affect. It's really a good opportunity for you internally to bring in some new fields and data metrics to kind of piggyback on this to help you improve your sales and marketing ROI.
Okay. And let's go back to our poll question today. I have some answers for that. I don't know if we have the overlay back to that, but interestingly was pretty well split up in 4 different quarters for the 4 questions. One of those is I have a program that I use to monitor my disclosures already. Another group would love to learn more about the Verify product. And then some would just eyeball the disclosures, and don't regularly monitor. So it's a split group, all in different 4 quadrants of the room, doing different things. Back to our poll question there.
Yeah, actually, this is pretty much a dead heat when you look at it, right? And this actually isn't something that necessarily surprises me. Some of you may have not thought about regularly reviewing your disclosures. I highly, highly recommend that you do this. Some things that I've personally encountered myself, I've seen situations where disclosures were missing key legal language that my organization required. I've seen situations where disclosures were cut off midway, so they only got half the disclosures. This could have been done. One of the web designers went in, copy-pasted the disclosures wrong, et cetera. I've seen disclosures that had offerings that my company didn't offer in the past. So it's very, very important that if you are regularly acquiring leads, that you are regularly reviewing these disclosures through an automated means to save yourself time and be more efficient.
Yeah, and also to caveat that, I mean, the Trusted Form Verify solution is relatively recent, looking at the need for that, to try to address those different 25% of each group. And if you increase the volume, obviously you need a more automated way to look at that. So within the last 3-4 months, that's a solution we've added to the portfolio. So if you haven't checked it out, please do, and ask us for a demo and learn more. But that's something that we're plugged in to try to help address those challenges of looking at all the information out there. Well, now it's time to shift to some questions. Thank you all for the questions out there. Michael, let's you and I poll through some of these and see if we have some good ones to answer. Let's see.
Let's see here.
I have one that says, "The vendors we work with are going with click-to-call ads. They don't require consent, or the view is they don't require consent because they're calling us. I feel like landing pages might need to have a click-to-call, still need some sort of disclaimer to state the company that may be directly transferred. Is this okay?" Not offering legal advice in any of these questions. With a phone number or a call to action of having someone contact you would certainly seemingly put you in a less risky position for TCPA. It can still trip up with the types of technologies that you're using and the transfers or all those sort of components. But a call to action for someone to call you may not trigger all of these requirements. I'm a privacy professional. I mean, notice and choice are critically important. Transparency, I mean, that's the theme of what the FCC has been doing for all of this. So you should always challenge whether it's, and do some checking of whether it's understandable, transparent, that the person knows who they're calling, they don't end up somewhere else, they know how to opt out. Try to meet all those principles, regardless of whether you trip up one of those codes. You'll be going in the right direction that the FCC and the FTC have been wanting all along.
And we've got another question on here. This one says, after January 2025, what are your recommendations for leads that come in without trusted form certificates prior to this rule change going into effect? Thinking specifically about our long-term SMS campaigns for 45-day plus follow-up calls. All right. So let me kind of unpack this real quick. So, you have a situation where you are acquiring leads where you don't have the trusted form certificate or some sort of record of consent for the consumer filling out the form. In a situation where the FCC 1-to-1 ruling came into effect, you don't know what that lead actually saw within their disclosures. In addition to that, depending on where you are buying those leads from, if that's a vendor who does a shared lead model where they sell it to multiple companies at the same time, you don't have 1-to-1 consent. So assuming in a retroactive environment, you probably cannot contact that lead. Obviously, we mentioned to seek legal advice on this, but our take on it is that you probably cannot in a retroactive scenario.
Okay, I have one that says, we use AI to transcribe our calls. Does that require consent or disclosure? Interesting question. I don't have a definitive answer for that. That declaratory ruling was a couple months back, so definitely seek some legal advice on that. Just me speaking, the transcription may not be as much of an issue. Caveat, it may not be. A lot of the recent developments around that was voice cloning and the other sort of things that can be used in deceptive ways. I believe AI can certainly be used for efficiencies and all sorts of things and positive benefits of that. The FTC and FCC are certainly focused on inappropriate uses for that. But seek legal advice on the transcription requirements about whether you would need to include a disclosure. And then obviously, when you're designing one anyway, you might as well include something that attempts to account for that if there's some legal cases that try to go down that pathway that then warrants the possibility of transcription. So we'll relate back to notice and consent language. But I'd get some legal opinion on that. But that's a good question. There's one, under the 1-to-1 consent rules, could a consent form allow customers to select one or more companies to contact them, meaning selecting 2 or 3 from a list of 10 possible companies? I've seen this, and I know there's others, and including Active Prospect is working on a model, ping, pick, post, to allow that to try to fulfill. And we have a website where you can go to get information about that. But looking very closely at what the FCC said, they were not opposed to, in a comparison site where an individual lands and then wanting to select multiple options of who to get contact from. They just did not want, put the consumer first, allow them to make the decision. And I even think they had a caveat of maybe you couldn't say select all, but there were some specifics around that. So it's not an out and out prohibition. But you will have to look, if you're putting the consumer, wear their shoes and say, yes, I'd like to select 2 out of 3 or 3 out of 3 and have a record of consent for each one. That does get down to the one-to-one consent so that they can revoke that particular individual. Let's say there's 3 of them that they selected. They only want to stop hearing one, is to try to enable that transaction and revoking to happen and all of the inquiries there.
Yeah, and Ben, one thing that I think is interesting about that question too, and this was kind of discussed in our webinar as well, is that in a scenario where, we talked about lead pricing, and in a scenario where a consumer can select multiple companies, depending on the number of companies they select, you may be charged different prices in this new world. So as an example, if they only choose you as the company, you're going to be charged for an exclusive lead. But if they charge you and 2 others, there's a real potential that you could be charged a different price point for those. So that's a good segue into some of our discussion topics that we did in the past, that type of a model is going to directly affect your lead pricing and potentially your marketing budgets.
Okay, there's one, I'll try to unpack this one. How should organizations obtain one-to-one consent when an organization uses different DBAs? So I'm assuming this is different entities or companies. So this is kind of the entity question. Example, ABC Inc. Does not have consent for this. Again, one to get a legal opinion on. We have heard the analysis or unpacking of the entity question can be complicated, and that with the spirit of what the FCC was trying to do, certainly certain other industries are more impacted by that when they have the entity or when they have the franchise model. So continue to stay tuned for those developments. I have seen good legal theories around the applicability or the best place to put you in the position to withstand those challenges if they do come your way. And I've seen lots of creative ideas around it. So explore that with your legal peers and colleagues around that arrangement.
One quick question here. I joined about 10 minutes late. What was the timeline for all changes needed to be made for one-to-one? We will be providing the recording of this webinar for you, so you have that for your own details.
Yes. And as we know, the January 27th, 2025 is the final one-to-one consent piece, but you do have to go back and look. We mentioned the retroactive piece as well, so look a little sooner than that. But we covered that in detail, and that's why we got the recording. So great. There's another one. I think we addressed this one. Is what if you wanted to have the consumer match to multiple companies? Are there any current solutions for that? Well, if it was in the comparison site model, we just addressed that the person could pick the individual. I've also heard, again, none of this being legal advice, about models if you were to create a business where the consumer contacts you for assistance specifically with that service, or they're looking for some sort of thing, but you would really have to structure that into being transparent that that's the nature of your business and it is just trying to connect you to viable sources of products or services for that. That could get into your company name and licensing and all that sort of stuff. But I have seen legal theories or thinking around that model, but it would require some changes to consider. Okay, we've got one. I have an outside marketing team that goes to shows. And do they need one-to-one consent when they're talking to a potential customer, like at a home show or something? Again, the caveat is it relates to the calling technology that you're using to not get potentially sucked into defense of those pieces. You have the arrangement of, well, if it's B2B, that's not directly applicable. It's also getting complicated when people are handing out their, you don't know if you're calling a cell phone, which increasingly you are calling a cell phone, which is a personal cell phone, not necessarily related to the business. But handing over a card is would not be as problematic. But again, be aware of your calling technology that you're using. Some other countries go in the space of, an opt-in or a double opt-in to just confirm that the individual does want to hear from you before you go all out. Those are models that have been used. I believe that one is used in Canada as well. But regarding trade shows and things like that.
Yeah, and Ben, to this question here, if you have an outside marketing team that's going to the show for you and you're originating leads from there, so like you have the potential consumer of your product going to a landing page at the show, filling in a form, you're likely going to want your company's legal disclosures there if you plan on calling them using the technologies that are regulated under the FCC's one-to-one consent. But to Ben's point, if you're at a show, you're just talking directly to somebody, very unlikely that's going to be under the one-to-one consent ruling. But if they are getting leads for you that's going into your CRM or contact center, you're going to want to make sure that those disclosures are right and they list your company.
Yeah. And then start paying attention to the revoking components of that, which are in October, where in any way, shape that they reach out to you, if it's stop, opt out, halt, right, all sort of variations, build a process to do that and make that easy.
Yeah. And Ben, to your point with the revoking of consent, when that goes into effect, whenever that ends up going into effect, you may want to have to holistically look at some of the systems that your company uses. So some of you that are out there that have like a branching model where you've got a corporate office and several branches, like, your local insurance agent, whatever it may be, you want to make sure that you have systems that when somebody goes to opt out, you only need to go to one or two places to make that opt out change, and you don't have to communicate it to 40 different branches and hope they do it. So it's good to have more of a unified software, a single CRM system of truth for that type of a model. There was a question. I understand the FCC opened back up the one-to-one for comment again at the beginning of the year. How does this impact the timeline?
Yeah, I think I'm not as current on this, but I think a component of that, or the major component of that, was impacts to small business, allowing additional comments around that. If that was the nature of that one, I believe that comment period has concluded, and then we would be waiting to hear back if the FCC has incorporated any of those components of the feedback. But I don't know if it would affect directly the timeline until we hear. The other piece that they have set as for us for compliance guidelines is that one of the bureaus, they have tasks as part of the FCC to provide more guidance specifically for small businesses around those components. So we'll look for that in the weeks and months ahead, as they did recognize there could be some impacts, and those that are in smaller companies needing to absorb what that specifically means for them. So we look forward to receiving some of that guidance. One is, have there been any A/B tests on the ping, pick, post method? Please reach out to us. We are definitely exploring that and definitely looking for interested parties. We have been having discussions with clients in that space for sure. And yes, we would welcome a collaboration on that for some further testing. So yeah, please reach out to us. How does the revocation by email apply to text and calling, or does the revocation by email apply to text and calling as well? The interpretation, not legal advice here, but is that it was purposely very broad. The FCC's intention was that, they read complaints about consumers getting on a list and just impossible to get off, or they've been shared with multiple parties. So trying to reduce that burden and friction. So they were pretty wide open when they said, and that might need to be refined too, because I know that one certainly raised my eyebrows. Right. Any reasonable method can go in a lot of different directions, and you're communicating to some of that for marketing purposes. Some of it is for updates about the service. Do you have an existing relationship? It can definitely go through a wide range of all sorts of things. But the spirit of it is, if a person says stop, you're going to, from a compliance perspective, you're going to start to need to analyze the receipt of that message, your interpretation of what did that mean to do, and then do your best to apply that in your CRM system, and do it as widely as possible. And I like to say, if someone says stop, do not call, maybe we should just get this individual out of the system anyway, because that could be a potential issue. Let's start to target and focus on people that do want to receive messages and communications. But yeah, something that does need to be considered with some legal input, and then a process to analyze those requests when they come in, because she's pretty wide open.
Yeah, and Ben, I can talk a little bit about this as well. So I recommend for companies, when you're going through any sort of revocation of consent, that there is, if you receive it via email or via some text message, obviously you want that stored in your CRM and contact center software. But let's say you receive an email offhand from a customer, you need to have like an email distribution list for people that you can forward that to. So that way they make sure they go into the appropriate systems and make the changes for those opt-outs in them. So as an example, if I was a sales agent, a customer emailed me and said, hey, I'm no longer interested, please take me off your list. I would then forward that to that internal email distribution list. The appropriate parties would see it, then go into the systems and update those flags accordingly within the platform. So there's a question on here. I'm going to try my best to answer this one. It says, how would you handle a situation when someone enters a phone number that is not their phone number, but is a phone number on the DNC list? So this is a pretty interesting question to receive. It's something that, if I'm interpreting this correctly, somebody goes into a form, they fill in a phone number that may not be theirs. That's on a state or federal do not call list. So in this type of scenario, you need to be regularly checking the leads that are submitted for accuracy of the data that's submitted. So as an example, if a customer goes through, they fill out a landing page form, they put in their name, their phone number, their email, they click on submit, it's got the appropriate disclosures. I actually recommend that you use a tool that sits in between your landing pages or the leads that you're buying and your CRM system. That tool would then do the appropriate scrubbing to determine if that phone number is valid, the email is valid, etc. Active Prospect does offer a tool like that. It's called Active Prospect's Lead Conduit. And what you can do is take that information, have it go into Active Prospect's Lead Conduit. You can claim the trusted form certificate, and then you can do verifications and validity checks of the information that's submitted, including that the phone number is valid, the email is valid, the person is not a known litigant. And then from there, after you've gone through, you've done those checks, you can do some deduplication as well. And then you would submit it into your CRM to ensure that customer's phone number is accurate.
Yeah, and there's providers out there that do that, and we have relationships with some of them. You could connect with them directly, or you could use our solution and Lead Conduit for analyzing those leads, and that could be one of the parts that you're connecting to see if that's a real number. And yeah, there's certainly analysis and information to do to reduce that risk, because that is a real legal risk.
That's right.
Happen.
That's right. And there's another question on here I could answer. Do you recommend creating a revocation field in the CRM similar to a one-to-one consent field? So in this, with the new rule change that's coming through, Ben, you touched on this quite a bit, but I want to kind of expand on it. So in a scenario where your legal interpretation is that this rule, if somebody communicates to me, hey, I'm opting out, I do not want you to communicate to me anymore, I would recommend having a field that documents that opt-out. And with that, then you can appropriately filter within your CRMs or contact centers and take those leads out from being called, so that way you are not out of compliance with this regulation.
Yeah, I've always, it's interesting in looking at it from a privacy lens, there's always that component of when someone, the rules that say right to deletion, we want to fulfill that, but the interesting irony is now you need to retain that individual's information so that it's not there.
Mm-hmm.
So it's taking the action and then saying, this is an individual who has requested not to be in the system or not to be contacted. So there is the irony of making sure that you retain that, but that's the fulfillment of those decisions for sure. Okay, let's do some closing outs of the information here. A couple of things to run down through. So we're going to throw up a quick poll to see, make it easy for you if you're interested to learn more about Active Prospect's product and solutions. If so, someone on our team will certainly reach out to you. We've got some tools and resources that we've shared today. We've got our blog content regularly about our FCC updates. Some information about Trusted Form Verify. We have a link for that. Should definitely look into that. And also we mentioned some of those company email templates for help. If you wanted some help about how do I even start to reach out to internal legal, external legal about these things or the other departments, here's some information to help you jump started and get that going. The recording is just going to, the recording of this session is going to be available and emailed out later on. So very soon, and stay tuned because the next episode is on May 22nd. Michael, thank you. It was really enjoyable preparing for this session with you, and we unpacked a lot of interesting topics, and really enjoyed it. So thank you.
You're very welcome, and I hope everybody enjoyed this webinar.
Yeah, look forward to doing it again. Thanks.